What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to the Uncommon Mindset podcast. Today, I'm joined by someone, when you say the word uncommon, he should come up in the dictionary for the definition. Today, I'm joined by John Stryker Meyer, also known as Tilt. John is an American U.S. Army Special Forces combat veteran of MACV-SOG, which stands for Military Assistance Combat Vietnam Studies and Observation Group. He was a team leader from 1968 till 1970 and was involved in some of the most dangerous operations of the Vietnam War behind enemy lines. John is also an author of many books such as Across the Fence, On the Ground, The Secret War of Vietnam, and Sag Chronicles. What an honor it is to have you on the podcast today, John.
Well, thank you, sir. It's my first one in Wales.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I just want to start off by asking, can you just give me a brief, explanation of what your upbringing was like and where did you get your nickname from?
Well, it's um, my upbringing was very common. So therefore, that's not the uncommon part of the story. But yeah, it started out in Trenton, New Jersey. Dad was a milkman. My mom was a choir director, piano teacher.
Mhm.
And born in Trenton, grew up, went to high school there, went to college for a couple of years, flunked out. At that time, that was 1966. The war in Vietnam was escalating. American involvement was deeper. More troops were going there. And I read the book, The Green Berets. And I said, if I go to Vietnam, if I can qualify, I want to go with these guys because they have more training. And I liked the book talked about their unconventional warfare methodologies. So I figured, if I'm going to go, see if I can go with these guys. So long story short, I enlisted in the Army, went through basic training, and then after basic advanced infantry training down in Georgia, went to jump school for 3 weeks, and then from there went up to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and began our special forces training. Went on for 7 months. Then after that, we had some 3 months of temporary duty training for radio teletype because my job within special forces was communications at the time. Then we had a leave, went to Vietnam, arrived there in April 1968, 3 months after the Tet Offensive, and we had in-country training. After the in-country training, at the end of it, they said, "Hey, we have a project. We're looking for volunteers." And my buddy Johnny McIntyre goes, "For what, Sergeant?" He says, "We can't say. Either you're in or you're out." So we volunteered. 1968, the movie The Green Berets with John Wayne was out. And so we volunteered. A couple of days later, we entered the Secret War, which was the uncommon part of our story.
Wow, wow. I was watching a podcast that you did. I forgot with who, but you mentioned that basically when you got to Vietnam, they basically told you guys that you're spies without telling you guys that you're spies. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And the reason why, our government, in all its infinite wisdom, in the early 60s had signed an accord of some sort saying that America would not have combat troops on Laos or Cambodia. We had been supporting South Vietnam,
Mm.
and we had supported the French before when they were there. And then when the French were defeated, um, American involvement was supporting South Vietnam because they were democratic and the North were the communists.
Mm.
And at that time, we were supporting any efforts against communism. So by 62, this accord came up. We agreed not to have combat troops on Laos or Cambodia. The North Vietnamese, the communists, the lying cowards that they are, agreed to the same thing. But of course, they lied.
Mm.
When they signed those accords, they had been moving people and supplies south already in for several years because they're anticipating uh, us getting involved, and they wanted to undermine the legitimate government that was in place at that time in South Vietnam.
Yeah. Okay, I see. I see. Okay, let's dive deep now into obviously the war in Vietnam, because I did mention that you've been a leader of some of the most craziest missions, right? And talk to me about that. Like, what was that whole experience like going behind enemy lines? Like, having, I know that you always say you're a survivor and not a hero, right? Because you made it back.
Right.
And what was that whole experience like? Because there must have been times where, you must have thought, this is it. I'm about to die here, right? What was
A
that
few
whole experience like?
times.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Well, here are some of the numbers. During the Vietnam War, which essentially the major years were from 64 to 1974, and of course Saigon fell April 30th, 1975. But during the war, we had 3.2 million Americans that served.
Mm,
Out of that, 20,000 were Green Berets. And a lot of those Green Berets were at the traditional, what they called A camps. It was a special forces camp with an A team with 12 Green Berets and indigenous people. A
mm,
lot were along the border, monitoring or trying to monitor enemy traffic coming into the country, enemy troop movement. And those A camps were, many of them were very dangerous duty. Our job, so out of the 20,000, 2,000 were in SOG, the Studies and Observations Group, the Secret War, where we signed documents saying we wouldn't talk about to anybody. And then, as you said, when we went across the fence on a mission, we carried no identification papers, no dog tags, no pictures, nothing that could identify us as an American, because that was plausible deniability that our government wanted in the event that the enemy killed or captured us.
mm,
And meanwhile, the communists, publicly said, "Oh, we have no troops in Laos." And by the time I got there in May of '68, there were 25 to 30,000 in Laos alone coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which brought supplies from the north south.
mm,
So we could have no conventional troops in Laos
mm,
or Cambodia. But the Vietnamese and the communists would come across the border, attack our bases, attack our allies, and then go back without any repercussions. So our war had to go in and we had to see what they were doing. We had area reconnaissance, and that was the part of the our missions that made it unconventional. And because we were going in small teams, that added to the higher danger, the risk. And so we'd fly in by helicopter, get on the ground, and then try to conduct the missions both in Laos, Cambodia, and they would involve everything from rescuing pilots who were shot down to a point mission, such as going in to blow up enemy fuel lines, to do a wiretap, to capture a live POW, or
mm,
an area or a point reconnaissance. Sometimes we do bomb damage assessments. After the B-52 would come in and do a bomb strike on a suspected enemy encampment, we would go back and see how effective it was and to assess the damage because the Air Force couldn't get their people on the ground.
mm,
They're busy flying. So we would go in. And then we also did, um, we inserted Air Force sensors. There were some parts of the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we would go in and put in a 3-part Air Force sensor. Had a central part, and then we had a coaxial cable that went out the 2 parts, had to bury everything, and just the sensors were above ground. So anything that came past was men, animals, trucks, tanks, bulldozers.
mm,
Those sensors could tell a difference. They recorded it, and then the Air Force would come by with their airplanes and pick up the information from those.
mm,
And out of the 20,000 Green Berets that served in Vietnam, about 2,000 were in SOG. About out of the 2,000, any depends on who you talk to, between 400 to 700 Green Berets actually ran missions across the fence.
mm.
And that's why it was higher risk. It turned out long after the war ended, we learned that SOG had the highest casualty rate. of the war, exceeding 100% casualties. And so, how does that happen? Well, some men were wounded several times, like Bob Howard,
Mm.
who received the Medal of Honor for his role in Vietnam in the Secret War across the fence. He received 8 Purple Hearts. So between the Green Berets that were killed or wounded in action or missing,
Mm.
so today it's March the 4th or March 3rd,
March 4th.
2021.
Yeah.
And today in Laos alone, there are 50 Green Berets who are still listed as, quote, missing in action, presumed dead, who were killed during the Secret War by the communists.
Mm.
In addition to that, there's over 100 Air Force, Army, and Marine Corps aviators who died flying aircraft or helicopters that supported our teams on the ground, and they died in mortal combat. To give you a sense of why our missions and the men who ran them were, as you said, uncommon.
That is, it's crazy to hear, some of the things that you've done. And what would you say has been where the mission that you've nearly been caught? Or has there ever been a mission that you nearly got caught? Or has it always been like a smooth mission where you've made it back and you're good
Well,
to go for
we
another one?
made it back, but again, it would not be because it was smooth. There would be direct contact and combat with the enemy.
Hmm.
But we were fortunate. The Vietnamese on my team were outstanding soldiers. They were fearless, and thanks to them and the aviators that supported us, I'm alive today. I'm just very fortunate. That's why I say I'm a survivor. I'm not a war hero.
Hmm.
Um, and for the people in Wales that may not be aware of this, we heard a lot of bad things, negative publicity about the war. But in my case, the Vietnamese on my team, they knew that their government in South Vietnam was corrupt,
Hmm.
but they knew how to live with it. And there's still essential freedoms that they would have even with a corrupt government.
Hmm.
And they were willing to die before becoming communists and before having the communists take over their country. So that's why we were there, and
Yeah.
that's why I felt justified, and to this day, still am proud of service in the Secret War and of the men that I served with. They're just outstanding individuals.
Of course, yeah. What would you say was the toughest part about going to war in Vietnam?
Well, again, for any combat that we had in Vietnam, which was very limited, that was not too challenging for us because our missions were all across the fence in Laos and Cambodia, where you had 25 to 30,000 troops, plus anybody who lived in Laos had to work with the communists. So that if our helicopter came in, if anybody saw our helicopter who lived there, they would have to tell the communists. If they didn't, and the communists learned that they saw us and didn't cooperate, they would kill them.
Hmm.
So they were ruthless. And so the local people, and then in Cambodia, they had over 100,000 troops down there several times. And sometimes our missions were to go down there and locate divisions, and a division has 10,000 men. And
Hmm.
so those would be our jobs to go down and see, find them, and then try to determine what they were doing. If nothing else, to say, hey, at this point, they're going to go east, meaning they're going to go across the border, across the fence from Cambodia or from Laos into Vietnam to attack our troops. They're not going in there to smoke the peace pipe.
Hmm.
They're going in there to kill and to win the war for the communists.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, you are a survivor and you made it back, thankfully. Um, what would you say, like, would you say that the people who served in war are treated once they come back to America? Because obviously we see all this thing where, veterans and people like that are not treated that well. Is that the sense of case, or are veterans actually treated well in America?
Well, at that time, there was a lot of anti-war activists some of whom were communists, and it was part of their effort to undermine America here
Mm.
and to turn as much as the American population against the soldiers. So you still had the families, you still had church groups, and a lot of parts of the country who understood what we were doing in Vietnam, but the media would always play up those who were in opposition to the war.
Mm.
Like they never interviewed anybody on my team, not that they could, but they didn't talk to any of the Vietnamese who said, "Hey, I prefer to be here than to live with the communists."
Mm.
The media would fuel that fire. So some of our people, when they came home, they had very, very bad experiences. And in my case, I wore my fatigue jacket after I got out of the Army. I got out of the Army in April 1970,
Mm.
went back to college, and went on to work in journalism for a while. And so there was a lot of that. But the benefit of that hostility at the time, the American people today, when a veteran comes home from the war, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, or special operators who have been to places in the world they can't talk about,
Mm.
when they come back, they're treated with respect.
Yeah.
And the American public delineates between the soldiers and the politicians who sent them off to war or the commanders. And that's the major difference today. And I think that's a benefit from our era because anybody who saw that, experienced it, realizes how wrong it was at the time.
Mm.
And today, veterans are treated much better. I mean, that's good. It's a good thing to come out of it.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. So when you look back now at the war, when you were, between 1968 and 1970, if someone asks you now, like, what's one thing that stood out to you when you were there, what would you say?
In terms of a personal experience or just the war itself or what? Because 1968 was a critical year. That was the year we had the highest manpower level in the war. By the end of 1968, we had 5,400, 5,043,000 Americans there
Well,
stationed in Vietnam.
yeah.
And 1 out of 10 Americans actually did combat. The rest were supply, communications, maintenance, things like that to keep the uh, combat troops in gear. And then of course, you had the helicopter crews, maintenance people for them.
Mm.
And without the maintenance crews, the helicopters wouldn't get off the ground. So they were a critical part of the war effort.
Yeah.
And 68 was the year, you started off with a Tet Offensive. The media portrayed it as an American defeat when in fact, every major battle in the Tet Offensive was won by the Americans. And every major battle during the war, American, Australian, any of our allies, they won those major battles.
Mm.
But the media wouldn't report it that way. They had their way of twisting it.
Why do you think that
So,
is?
say again?
Sorry, why do you think that is?
I'm not sure.
Mm.
I think the reporters were lazy then. There's some reporters who were highly respected who did good stories, but the Vietnam War was just really different that way because
Mm.
they had a very jaundiced view of the war, and the military brought a lot of that themselves. They'd have a press conference almost every day in Saigon, and they would talk about casualties, and they were emphasizing how many enemy troops they killed, as opposed to talking about the different impacts of the war and trying to show reporters a more realistic picture. So the military received a lot of blame for that. And the reporters, some of whom I knew, were outstanding people.
Mm.
But again, they're in a country that's foreign. They're covering a war where they can see corruption. I mean, our allies had corrupt people.
Mm.
And so they're reporting, hey, man, why are we supporting a corrupt government? Well, the answer is it's better than communism.
Yeah.
And should our people die for that? Some people felt we shouldn't. In my case, the Vietnamese that I worked with, they believed absolutely that we should be there, and they were appreciative of us keeping them away from the communists.
Yeah. No, of course. What was your what was your whole mindset like becoming going into the army? Like, because you read the book Green Beret, was that the main reason that you got into the army, or what was the story behind that?
That was the main reason. I mean, I knew I was going to get drafted. In 1966, there was still a draft.
Hmm.
So they had a draft system where throughout the country, every city had a draft and had a draft board. They needed more service members. So some would get drafted. They would go in the Marine Corps or the Army, or I think some even went to the Navy. So with the draft on, I didn't want to be drafted and then told where to go. And I certainly didn't want to be in the Navy.
Hmm.
I mean, nothing personal against the Navy. I just didn't want to be floating around on big ships out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. You know, it's made me nervous.
Yeah.
I'd rather jump out of airplanes. And I read the book, and the people, the Green Berets that were portrayed there were unconventional, and they fought with great valor.
Hmm.
And so it's like, oh, okay, let's go check this out. Well, I passed all the tests, got through training group, and it was time to go to war. So when
Yeah.
we got there, we volunteered for the Secret War, and that's what we took on.
That's great. What was training like? Was it as difficult as because I know the Navy do Hell Week, right? Navy SEALs. Wh-
Right.
What's the training like to get into the army?
Well, the again, Hell Week is specifically part of the SEAL training.
Hmm.
So in the Army, like in my case, you go through basic and you go through advanced infantry training where you learn how to fire the essential weapons that the Army was using in Vietnam.
Hmm.
Then we had jump school and then special forces training where you learn more about the people. And then we had individual training for each team. And then when we're in country, like in my case, when I came to our launch site was Phu Bai. They had 6 command posts in Vietnam for the Secret War in 1968.
Hmm.
I went to FOB 1, which is up in I Corps. In Vietnam, you had I Corps, Hyatt, which is on the DMZ, and then 2 Corps, 3 Corps, then 4 Corps was the Mekong Delta area. And up where we were, like the day I came into camp, a recon team went out and disappeared. It was totally wiped out. 2 Americans and 4 or 5 South Vietnamese.
Hmm.
So there was an opening in recon, and then we rebuilt the team. We hired more South Vietnamese, and we trained for a few months getting ready. So that individual training there was geared specifically for the Secret War. Everything from repelling weapons, using claymore mines for ambushes, using helicopters, and using helicopters for rope extractions. Like if you're in a firefight
Hmm.
and you want to go home, but there's no LZ for the helicopter to land, then you needed to have them drop ropes. It'd be 150-foot ropes, come through the jungle, you'd hook in, they'd lift you up and then go, which
Wow.
in and of itself is fairly perilous. Then you add to it people shooting at you and wanting to kill you. Um, so that added to the Secret War, and there's another side of that dilemma of the battle to survive and come back and fight another day.
Hmm. Hmm. No, that's it's crazy. Like, I can't like it's crazy to think that just when you're going out to a mission or anything like that, knowing that, look, I could die today, right? I could be shot today, anything can happen, I can be captured or anything like that. And it's crazy to hear like the stories and stuff like that about the war, and especially about the Vietnam War as well. Um, what are you doing at the moment now then? Are you doing anything? Are you still pursuing journalism, or are you doing anything like that?
Today, I'm not sure. I know you're a famous podcaster in Wales, but I don't know if you heard of a gentleman named Jocko Willink. But
Yes, I
Jocko
love
has
Jacko.
a podcast, and I'm working with Jocko. We're going to begin putting together more SOG podcasts with Jocko. We're
Wow.
going to interview SOG soldiers just for Jocko. He's going to post them on his social media. And then the next book will come out with I'm going to begin working on my 4th book in the springtime. And then my wife and I, we just moved. We moved from California to Tennessee. So we're settling into our new area that we're living in. So
Mm.
that's going to be the future. We got a couple of beautiful grandchildren, and we're going to be, following them and trying to enjoy life a little bit, but still working, because there are lessons learned from our era that were never passed on.
Mm.
So today we still occasionally go back and talk to today's Green Berets and others in the special operations field. So before you know it, a week goes by pretty fast.
No, of course, yeah. No, it's amazing to hear that, you're working with Jocko, and Jocko's someone who's incredible. Like when you go into Jocko's Instagram, he wakes up at 4:30 every morning and he posts a photo of his watch.
He
And
does.
he's
The man's an
crazy.
animal, but he's an intellectual animal. He's strong physically. He's an English major. So he's very articulate,
Hmm.
and he delves deep. As the best interviews I've ever had were with Jocko, clearly,
Yeah,
because he spends hours researching before he asks you one question, and
yeah.
that becomes evident when you watch his podcast. And since June of 2019 now, I've been very fortunate to have 8 interviews with him. We worked together on SOG stories, and people have a great deal of interest. And now, like yourself, people are learning about it, because we had signed documents saying we wouldn't talk about it for 20 years. I mean, you couldn't enter the secret war unless you signed that document saying, I won't talk about it.
For 20 years, right?
20
Just
years. And then on top of that, here's another sidebar to that. If I get killed in Laos,
hmm.
my parents won't tell. They won't be told the truth. And one of the sad legacies of the Secret War that we've had to live with as survivors are the 50 Green Berets who are still listed as missing in action by our government.
Hmm.
A lot of their families were never told. Their mothers, in many cases, their mothers, their fathers have all died without knowing where their son died
Hmm.
or what he was doing and what valor. Because the majority, I'd say 99% of the Green Berets and the aviators who died supporting them did so in mortal combat with communist forces
Hmm.
that are they were supported by Russia and China to help take over South Vietnam and to combat us. And, the families never knew. And we had Green Berets that earned the Medal of Honor. Well, in their citations, it says Bob Howard earned the Medal of Honor December 1968 for combat action and heroism in
Hmm.
South Vietnam. So they lied even when they handed out the awards, because that secret war was top secret. They were dead serious about it.
Yeah, yeah. Were you married at the time when you went to war?
No, some of the guys were. I can't, to this day, I can't imagine how anybody joins the armed services and then goes off to war
Hmm.
with a wife and kids at home. I mean, it's another level of patriotism that just blows my mind. I don't know how they did it, because it was bad enough just going off to war, knowing if you get killed, your parents and your family and your members will be upset. But to do that and then to still have a wife and children, that's a hard case. But we've got guys today. Of course, the pay's better today, and the careers are better. There's more benefits, and there's a lot more support than what we had in our day.
Yeah.
So can't complain about that. But
Hmm.
no, I was single, glad to be single.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, no. What would you tell your younger self if you could go back in time?
Meaning in regards to the war, or
In regards just in life, like, growing up, like for example, I tell myself to not worry about what other people would think of me.
right.
That's a huge thing that I would, tell myself. But just in regards to life, like just in regards to your life, what would you tell yourself?
That's a good question. I never thought about that way. Because I wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, because by the time I flunked out of college, I was 20 years old. I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do in life. I hadn't found that niche. I hadn't found something that I really wanted. So the war was on. I was going to get drafted. So I enlisted. So I enlisted specifically because I wanted to try to earn the privilege of earning my Green Beret, to serve with the best in America at that time.
Hmm.
And I came out of that a better man than when I went in. I mean, to this day, I judge anybody I meet against the men I served with in Vietnam, the Green Berets that I served with. Now,
Hmm.
we're not perfect. We have some characters, like any organization. There's a couple of deadheads, but that's life.
Hmm.
But for me personally, upon reflection, I just wish that our government had been more earnest and more serious about actually trying to win the war, as we did in World War II, World War One.
Hmm.
Where you go in with an objective to win at all costs, as opposed to having your hands tied and let the enemy sit and lay us in Cambodia, come across the border, attack, and go back and lick their wounds and come back and attack you another day. It's ridiculous.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, honestly, thank you so much, John. Like, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate what you've gone through. You definitely, I was going to say you're definitely a hero, but obviously you're a survivor, right? uh, but yeah, no, in my eyes, someone who's gone to war and done what you've done, you're definitely an uncommon individual, like I said. Is
Indeed.
there,
All the men I served with are uncommon and unique in nature. So but I thank you for that. And I'm a happy survivor. I
yeah,
lucked out when I came back, got my education, had a career, and then the last 10 years, we helped veterans get affordable housing before we moved to Tennessee. And
wow.
now I'm focusing on getting out the more stories about the SOG veterans, the Secret War,
Mm,
and to get those stories out, both through podcasts. That's the social media that
mm,
I'm still amazed at the way it reaches people,
yeah.
and trying to adapt to that. If you ever get more suggestions about a better way to get the word out, just give me another call. And but thank you for this opportunity to talk about my books. And the first one was Across the Fence. The second one was On the Ground. They're
Mm,
both available as audiobooks,
yeah.
and they're available as ebooks. So if you have a tight budget, you get the ebook. It's only $3.
Yeah, no, of course. What I'll do, guys, I'll leave all the books links down below so you can go and check them out as well. Definitely go and check them out. John, his stories are incredible, and I mean, I'm excited to see the more work you do with Jocko as well. That'll be amazing to watch as
Well,
well.
thank you. Looking forward to it. And again, just to let you know, like in my mind, if we have a danger scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the most dangerous, the Green Berets that I served with in the Secret War, there's so many that are like, they're like a 9 to 10. I feel like I'm a 5 or a 6 because there are other men that had valor and experiences that
Mm,
are just exceeded whatever I came up against. Again, that's why I'm happy survivor and trying to tell as many stories as we can.
of
I
course.
appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, John. Honestly, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate everything you've done. Is there anything you want to say now, just before I let you go, just to the viewers or anything like that?
No, no, it just whenever your veterans, you see your veterans in your country, be sure to thank them for the service and enjoy life. There's an old saying that the men that we served with who died in combat, if they were alive today, they would say us enjoy life, live it to the fullest, and that's my message to everybody today. Life is too short, so
Yeah.
enjoy it, do the best we can.
No, I love that. I love that. Thank you again, John. And
All
stay
right,
safe.
thank you. Until next time, appreciate it.